One of the most telling production slips occurs in the episode The Big House. Barney Fife, in full instructional mode, proudly teaches Gomer Pyle how to draw his gun. He's focused, serious, and completely convinced of his authority. Gomer follows instructions. Too literally. Barney explains the steps with exaggerated clarity, his voice sharp and authoritative, his posture stiff with self-importance. He demonstrates how to grip the weapon, how to angle the body, how to pull the gun free in one clean motion. Gomer nods, listens, absorbs every word. And then he does exactly what Barney says. When Gomer draws the gun, it fires. The shot isn't part of the script. There's a split second, barely noticeable, where Don Knotts' expression changes. His eyes widen just enough. His body stiffens. His confidence cracks. It's fear. Real, unfiltered fear. And then, almost instantly, he recovers. The scene continues. The rhythm resumes. But the moment remains. Editors could have cut it. Producers could have res-hot the scene. They didn't. Why? Because it looked real. And maybe that's the most revealing thing of all. How many times does authenticity slip through because it feels too honest to remove? And how often do audiences sense that honesty, even if they can't quite name it? The art of invisible control. What made the Andy Griffith Show remarkable wasn't the absence of chaos. It was how carefully chaos was contained. Every episode followed an emotional blueprint. Conflict appeared gently, never violently. Problems were human, not existential. The stakes were personal, not catastrophic. And above all, Sheriff Andy Taylor never raised his voice. That was intentional. Andy Griffith believed authority didn't need volume. It needed clarity. Confidence. This wasn't accidental casting. It was philosophy. In a decade shaped by Cold War anxiety, civil rights unrest, and cultural upheaval, Mayberry offered something radical. Stability without force. So ask yourself, what does it say about an era that its most comforting hero carried no gun, rarely punished anyone, and trusted conversation over command? And why does that still resonate today? Barney Fife. Anxiety in uniform. Barney Fife wasn't just comic relief. He was anxiety personified. He represented every insecurity that authority can't erase. He wanted respect, admiration, recognition, and feared he'd never truly earn any of it. That's why Don Knotts' performance worked. Barney wasn't stupid. He was afraid. Afraid of failing. Afraid of being overlooked. Afraid of not matching. Knotts once explained that Barney's confidence was armor, not ego. Every boast masked doubt. Every outburst hid vulnerability. And Andy Taylor understood that. He didn't mock Barney. He managed him. Which leads to an uncomfortable truth. How many people do we laugh at without recognizing the fear driving their behavior? And how many Barneys have we dismissed instead of understood? The calm that was carefully learned. Andy Taylor's serenity wasn't just a personality trait. It was a learned discipline. Andy Griffith drew inspiration from his own upbringing in Mount Airy, North Carolina. He remembered men who didn't rush to judgment. Who listened first. Who believed authority was something you earned daily, not something you enforced once. That worldview shaped every scene. When Andy paused before responding, it wasn't filler. It was philosophy in action. Silence mattered. And television at the time wasn't built for silence. Producers worried viewers would get bored. Executives feared pauses would feel empty. Instead, those pauses became the show's heartbeat. Why? Because silence invites reflection. And reflection invites trust. When perfection became a trap. Ironically, the show's success eventually became its cage. By the later seasons, the Andy Griffith Show was no longer just a program. It was an institution. A symbol. A benchmark for wholesome television. And symbols don't evolve easily. Andy Griffith began to feel trapped by expectations. The more perfect Mayberry appeared, the less room there was for growth. That pressure is subtle, but crushing. Imagine knowing that millions of people find comfort in who you are on screen, while quietly fearing you'll never be allowed to become anyone else. So when Griffith walked away at the peak, it wasn't arrogance. It was survival. How many people leave success not because they've failed, but because success refuses to let them change? The world that Mayberry replaced. It's easy to forget what television looked like before Mayberry. Many early sitcoms were loud, fast, chaotic. Problems were exaggerated. Punchlines rushed. The Andy Griffith Show slowed everything down. It trusted viewers to stay. And that trust was revolutionary. In a way, Mayberry didn't just reflect America. It offered an alternative version of it. A place where decency prevailed not because people were perfect, but because they tried. But here's the question we rarely ask. Was Mayberry ever meant to be realistic, or aspirational? And does it matter which one it was? Francis Bavier's quiet resistance. Aunt Bee's warmth felt effortless. But for Francis Bavier, it came at a cost. She worried she was disappearing behind kindness. That her training, ambition, and range were being flattened into a single smile. And yet, audiences adored her. That contradiction haunted her. She wanted respect as an actress. The world wanted Aunt Bee. Who was right? Can public love become a kind of prison? And when does gratitude turn into quiet resentment? Her final decision, to acknowledge Aunt Bee on her gravestone, feels less like surrender and more like reconciliation. Perhaps she finally understood that being remembered, even imperfectly, still mattered. A child watching adults pretend. Ron Howard didn't understand the cultural significance of what he was part of. He was just a kid doing a job. But kids notice things adults forget. He noticed tension. He noticed silences. He noticed when scenes worked, and when they didn't. And maybe that's why he later became a director who valued nuance. Because the Andy Griffith Show taught him that storytelling didn't need spectacle. It needed honesty. What lessons are today's children absorbing from the worlds we build for them now? And which of those lessons will follow them for life? Why the unscripted moment matters. So why does that accidental gunshot still linger? Because it breaks the spell. Just for a second, Mayberry isn't a symbol. It's a set. The actors aren't characters. They're people reacting in real time. And that crack doesn't weaken the show. It strengthens it. Because perfection is distant. But imperfection feels human. And humans are what we connect to. The comfort that endures. Decades later, the Andy Griffith Show remains in constant rotation. New generations discover it. Old ones return to it. Why? Because comfort doesn't age. Because kindness doesn't expire. Because the idea that problems can be solved through patience still feels revolutionary. And because somewhere deep down, we want to believe that places like Mayberry could exist, even if they never quite did. So the next time you watch that familiar opening, ask yourself, what moments were carefully planned, and which ones slipped through? What imperfections did you overlook because the world felt safe? And what does it say about us that the calm we crave most was built on human uncertainty? Because maybe the real magic of the Andy Griffith Show isn't that it hid its flaws so well, but that, every once in a while, it let us see them. And trusted us to stay anyway. The gun mishandling sends an object flying, and suddenly, unmistakably, a glass behind them shatters. It's real. Too real to be staged. The sound is a knife edge cut through the carefully measured calm of the scene. Sharp, sudden, and unplanned. Then the camera cuts. When the scene resumes, the shelf behind them is perfect again. No broken glass. No cleanup. No acknowledgement. It's as if the accident never happened. How often did early television simply move forward, trusting viewers not to question what they'd just seen? How different is that from today's obsessive attention to detail, where every frame is inspected and every pixel interrogated? And what does it mean for a show, for a community, even when its seams are visible? This is not merely a catalog of mistakes. It's a portrait of a working world where time was short, budgets were tight, hearts were earnest, and human mistakes were inevitable. It's about Mayberry, its inhabitants both real and invented, and the small, stubborn imperfections that made the town feel alive. A town built from pieces. Mayberry feels lived in because it was built quickly, by people who learned to improvise. The set designers glued together storefronts, carpenters measured and cut and fixed. Wardrobe found pockets where there weren't any the moment the scene demanded one. The result was a town that had personality and wrinkles. A place where a bell could migrate across handlebars, or a trench coat could change weather without ever seeing the rain. That patchwork quality can feel endearing or sloppy depending on how you look at it. But to understand why these things happened, you have to picture the conditions. Tight shooting schedules, limited rehearsal time, crew members juggling multiple jobs, and a pressure cooker of deadlines. Actors often had to move from one scene to the next as if no time had passed. A single wardrobe assistant might be responsible for dozens of costume changes. Continuity, the invisible thread that keeps a story seamless, was a luxury that sometimes frayed. And yet, through the seams, the show's humanity shows. The glass that disappeared. Let's return to that broken glass. The sound snaps through the scene, drawing the audience's immediate attention. For a fraction of a second, the world is jolted. This is not a controlled gag, not a carefully timed visual. It's a real interruption. A prop slips. A bottle topples. The crash is bright and final. Then a cut. When the scene restarts, the world is sterilized. The shelf is whole. The actors move on. No one mentions the noise. The show behaves as if reality was never interrupted. Why not stop? Why not react? For one thing, live-to-tape television in that era operated with momentum. Stopping the machine cost time and money. More importantly, the performance ethic of the time prized forward motion. Mistakes were often swallowed by the narrative rather than served up and dissected. The trust, or perhaps the assumption, was that viewers would follow the story rather than pause to examine the frame. Is that a kindness or a concealment? Floyd's glasses and the art of keeping a straight face. Continuity occasionally wandered into comic territory. In Season 4's The Rumor, Floyd Lawson, the barber whose nervous energy was a match for any small-town gossip, becomes the center of a tiny visual mystery. In one cut, he wears rounded wire-rimmed glasses. In the next, the frames are suddenly heavier, darker, a different shape altogether. Floyd continues his monologue as if nothing happened. The audience either laughs quietly or simply misses the change. But the viewers who notice feel like secret holders, now privy to the show's human scaffolding. What makes that moment funny is the stoicism of the actor. Floyd's lines are the same. His mannerisms are the same. Nothing in the script asks him to be two different men at once. Yet the glasses say otherwise. The change is like a wink behind the camera. The production is alive, messy, and, crucially, unafraid of that messiness. When you notice, do you feel complicit? Do you smile at the small imperfection, or do you recoil at the illusion's failure? Barney's pocket. A small, silent joke. Barney Fife's sudden pocketed cigarette is another example of these tiny interruptions. In one cut, he's in a plain plaid shirt. In the next, a cigarette pack has materialized, as if the fabric ironically birthed it between frames. These moments are not just the result of quick wardrobe adjustments. They reflect a storytelling culture where props were often handled at the last minute. The pocket might have been filled to give Barney a physical action. A cigarette can be a prop that adds to his nervous energy. But the instant the camera returns, our perception shifts. We realize the mise-en-scene is mutable, and that the show's priority remains the story's forward motion over absolute visual consistency. What does that tell us about the relationship between story and craft? Does story trump continuity, or does continuity serve story? A bell with a mind of its own. In Opie's Ill-Gotten Gain, the bell on Opie's bicycle moves like a mischievous spirit. At first, it sits on the left side of the handlebars. The camera moves on. The scene returns, and the bell is on the right. No one touched it. No one mentions it. Why does this tiny migration linger in the mind? Perhaps because it's a physical reminder that Mayberry's world is not immutable. The bell's movement is almost playful. It feels like a child's trick. The show acknowledges the world's fallibility by not acknowledging the bell at all, and that choice lets the mistake be part of the town's color. Would modern shows hide that slip with CGI or a reshoot? Almost certainly. But would the reshoot make the world less charming, or simply more polished? The weather, the coat, and the courthouse switch. Barney's trench coat in a black day for Mayberry undergoes a strange weather event. One moment dry, the next soaked as though it had run through a storm on its way to the set. A cut later, it's back to dry. There's no continuity of weather, only an oscillation that suggests either a rushed lighting setup, a water spill patched hastily, or a quick arc from one shot earlier filmed in different conditions. And then there are the Treasury agents in the courthouse. Rance Howard sits in the background in one shot. When the camera returns, the men are different but in the same places. It's like the stage has rearranged its furniture and actors in the interstitial space of a real change. Are these the marks of neglect? Or are they evidence of a living set where people and objects are in flux, shifting like furniture in a house where a family is always in motion? The bear that needed backup. Perhaps the most audacious of Mayberry's gambits is when the writers contrive a story that requires a live bear. In Andy and the New Mayor, a bear enters the narrative. Too big, too alive, too unpredictable, and the frames betray the production's attempt to control the beast. Behind a tree, a handler's hand, then an arm, then a safety chain briefly comes into view. What's striking here is not the error but the ambition. No one would fault a production that keeps all animal actors off stage entirely. Yet Mayberry's makers tried something riskier. They invited a bear into a community that had been built to be ordinary, and in doing so, deliberately opened the possibility of error. Did they expect the chain to appear? Probably not. Did they hope the audience would play along? Absolutely. There's a special audacity in staging a world where a bear could walk through and still hope the show keeps its soft feel. Would today's safety and insurance regimes allow such a sequence? In all likelihood, no. And if not, what do we trade for the safer world? Authenticity, spontaneity, the gentle terror of unpredictability. The window that led nowhere. Spatial continuity can be trickier than moving props or wardrobe. From the outside, the sheriff's office in early seasons shows a window beside the door. Step inside, and that window is missing. The town's geography bends like a paper map, edges folded to fit the demands of a scene. Such things happen all the time in theater and film, yet they feel especially intimate when they occur in a place viewers think they know. Mayberry was supposed to be a place you could stroll down Main Street and know where to find Floyd's barbershop, Andy's office, and the diner. Yet the set was a pragmatic thing, built for camera movement, not cartography. When production later corrected the mistake, rebuilding walls to make the interior and exterior map onto each other, it was less an admission of failure than the slow settling of a town that had matured. The early mismatch remains like a childhood scar, an oddity that marks the development from quick sketch to consistent portrait. Do you notice the difference between places designed for performance and places designed for living? How does that affect the way we enter fictional worlds? The final day. Exhaustion and elegy. When the Andy Griffith Show came to an end, it didn't wither. It stopped at a high point, finishing as the #1 rated show on television. That rare achievement, to go out on top, is shared with cultural behemoths like I Love Lucy and Seinfeld. It's easy to mythologize endings, to imagine poignant finales staged for maximum tears. But endings are often logistical before they are emotional. The final episode filmed, A Girl for Goober, was not the last to air. The network scheduled a Mayberry RFD episode as a bridge into the spin-off, smoothing the passage for loyal viewers. The final filming day was described by journalists who filled the set to witness what they knew was a rare closing. Andy Griffith greeted the reporters with calmness, as if trying to hold both gratitude and goodbye in a single hand. The cast looked spent, as if 8 years of performance had finally arrived at an endpoint. Ron Howard, still a child but always an actor, had a simpler next step: school. For him, the stage would fold back into ordinary classrooms, homework, and recess. Griffith couldn't imagine what would come the next week. He removed the sheriff's badge, delivered his last line, a small question to Goober about a date, and the lights went dark. That night, 251 guests gathered at Griffith's golf club for a wrap party. When Andy spoke, he admitted the years were the best of his life and promised he'd see them again. It was a gratitude that acknowledged the show's human cost as well as its joy. Do great shows end because they have to, or because their creators choose to leave before the magic fades? Which is more honorable, to stop at the top or to keep mining a vein until the seams show? Why the cracks matter. The small mistakes are not simply curiosities for the fan who loves to rewind. They are evidence of a culture that permitted error and, more importantly, often considered those errors part of the texture. The show's sloppy seams are not excuses but signatures. They remind us that the people who made Mayberry were fallible and, because of that, more believable. There's a broader cultural question here. We live in an era of instantaneous correction. When a green screen shows a seam now, the production can fix it in post. When a prop slips, editors splice. Mistakes still happen, but they are less visible, less communal. The result is a kind of perfection that can feel sterile. When nothing is allowed to slip, do we lose something human? Our imperfections, a bell that moves sides, a dry coat that becomes wet, a background actor replaced mid-shot, a kind of honesty? They are like laughter leaking through a serious face. They reveal the person behind the performance. Is it possible that we cling to these imperfections as proof that a show was made by people rather than machines? If so, what does that say about our appetite for authenticity? Character in the small things. One of the reasons Mayberry endures is that, beneath inconsistencies, the characters remain consistent. Andy Taylor's calm moral center, Barney Fife's comic self-importance, Opie's childhood curiosity, these remain the gravitational center of the show. Small continuity slips do not alter the characters' moral cores. In fact, they can deepen our affection for them. Consider Barney. The man who willfully overreacts, who can't resist a flourish, becomes more human when a pocket appears where none was a moment earlier. The pocket is not a betrayal of his essence. Rather, it's a tiny artifact of the actors' and crew's attempts to make Barney real in a hurry. The mistake becomes part of the lore. Remember the time Barney had the cigarette appear out of nowhere? It becomes a joke shared between the production and viewers. Floyd's changing glasses do not make him a less foolish barber. They make him a man whose costume sometimes has a life of its own. The bear's handler appearing in frame does not make Mayberry less brave. It makes the production bravely insist on doing something risky. Do you find characters more affectionately human when their world falters? Is fidelity to personality a more important measure of authenticity than fidelity to props? Behind the camera, the people who hold the set together. The unseen labor of grips, gaffers, costume assistants, prop masters, and script supervisors is where these tiny miracles, and small misfortunes, happen. The script supervisor's job is to keep track of continuity. When they fail, it isn't because they weren't paying attention. Often it's because the production is moving faster than the human mind can map. The prop master might run to another set for the matching cup. The wardrobe assistant may be changing outfits faster than anyone knows how. These jobs rarely receive public praise, but they shape the texture of what appears on screen. The visible mistakes are sometimes the product of an exhausted person's best efforts being stretched thin. That context turns the accidental pocket into a human story. The moment a person on the crew made a last-second choice and the camera caught the result. Would the show's texture be the same if we saw the names of these people rolling on screen? Would we watch differently if we knew the human cost of every change? The ambition of early television. There's a kind of courage in the way Mayberry's creators attempted ambitious things without the technological safety net modern productions possess. Putting a real bear on set, staging complex crowd scenes, juggling locations, and a tight schedule. These are creative decisions that assume a certain level of risk. Modern productions, with their budgets and digital tools, can aim for scale and polish, but that polish has a cost. The spontaneous human moment is less likely to appear. When things go slightly off the rails, the director can choose to reshoot until the mistake disappears. That option is a luxury but also a filter. It removes the raw instances that a living production sometimes births. Does a world with fewer visible errors make art better, or does it make it less alive? The viewer as witness. Another angle to consider is the cultural contract between a show and its audience. In the era when Mayberry aired, viewers consumed television differently. There was a willingness to accept an imperfection as part of the bargain. You would go to the show for the warmth, the characters, the simple moral logic. The occasional visual slip was not a betrayal. It was a shared secret. Today's audiences often watch with different eyes, pausing, rewinding, freezing frames, and posting anomalies across social media. The scrutiny is both a product of technology and of changed expectations. We demand that the world presented to us be internally consistent down to the pixel. We have the tools to demand it. Do we ask too much of fiction? Or is the demand for consistency simply a reflection of evolving standards and a growing sophistication in visual storytelling? Small mistakes, big longevity. If you ask why the Andy Griffith Show endures, beyond the famous theme song and Andy's moral steadiness, perhaps the answer is this. It contains the imperfect marks of human making. The show does not hide its process. Instead, it makes a home in the space between the intended and the accidental. Those little slips are like fingerprints, unique marks that tell us, plainly, that people cared enough to make a town and its people, and that they did so with haste, humor, and love. When Andy takes off his badge for the last time and the lights go dark, the town keeps existing in memory. Wobbles, misplaced props and all. Maybe those misplaced pieces are what keep it from feeling like a museum exhibit. They keep it from being immaculately preserved. They make it a place somebody once lived. Would Mayberry mean the same to you if it had been immaculate? Or do you prefer the town that still has a bell that moves from left to right? Just because? A final thought. The value of imperfection. In a culture that often equates finish with value and polish with virtue, the small imperfections in Mayberry ask a different kind of question. What if the evidence of human making, the loose thread, the shout caught off mic, the pocket that appears without explanation, is not a failure but a form of truth? Perfection can be impressive. Imperfection can be intimate. The cracks in the Andy Griffith Show make the town feel like a place where people argue, laugh, and sometimes drop a glass or forget to button a shirt. The show doesn't pretend otherwise. It offers us a stage-made world that still breathes, and within that breath, we find the things we like best in storytelling. Humor that surprises, characters that remain coherent despite chaos, and an atmosphere that welcomes the viewer into its human heart. So next time you notice a bell that has moved, or a man's glasses that suddenly look different, ask yourself, what does that tiny fact tell you about the people who made the show? About the era that produced it? About the fragile, brilliant enterprise of making a small town that still feels real? Mayberry may have been fictional, but the care behind it, and the humanity beneath it, were always real. And maybe, just maybe, the odd little misfires are the very reason we still walk its streets in memory.